What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video. Today we're going to be looking at the werewolf build. So the werewolf is pretty much one of the easiest DPS builds that you can actually do. It's a very brain dead rotation. It's basically just a light attack with the occasional claws of life here and there. So it's a very simple rotation to do, and the gear it can be a little bit tricky to get the gear together, but a real kind of gear that you really need is really just Relequen and Molag. The front bar set, you have a few options when it comes to which one you want to use. So the werewolf is a very easy way for you to kind of get into Vet Trials because it can pull Vet Trials DPS. Now, that being said, there are a couple of weaknesses with running the werewolf build. In particular, you don't have access to any sort of additional cleave damage. So a lot of raid leads aren't really that keen on introducing a werewolf build. One, because you don't have additional cleave damage, and two, you kind of fall into that sort of trap where you're very strong with your werewolf, but how strong are you when you're out of your werewolf form? Because you won't be able to keep your form indefinitely in trials. So a lot of raid leads will not only ask for, okay, your DPS is good on a werewolf, what about your DPS on a non-werewolf? So if you do want to run a werewolf build, you must keep in mind that you cannot keep your werewolf build indefinitely throughout a trial. You will lose cleave damage, and so you need to be able to perform as a non-werewolf as well. So just because you're able to meet a DPS check on a werewolf does not mean you are guaranteed a spot in a trials guild as a DPS. You must be able to meet that DPS check as a non-werewolf as well. Pretty much all guilds are like this, where they will take a werewolf, but you must also have that DPS, meet that DPS check as a non-werewolf as well. So that's kind of what you have to keep in mind if you do want to play as a werewolf DPS. So just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build yourself. We'll talk a little bit about our rotation, but as a werewolf you only have one bar, so it's going to be a very brief discussion overall. And then we'll do a 6-minute dummy parse so you guys can get an idea of the amount of DPS that you're able to pull on this build. So, starting things off here first with our gear. So the gear has pretty much remained exactly the same between when the werewolf build first really became a thing back in Wolf Hunter and Wrathstone. So your gear is pretty much identical in terms of what is going to perform the best. So it's going to be Molag, it's going to be your Monster Helm set. So this comes from White Gold Tower, so you do not have access to the Imperial City DLC in order to grab this set here. If you don't have access to the Imperial City DLC, you have a few base game options to kind of choose from. So the first and strongest option is going to be Selene's. This is a base game set that comes from Selene's web. So pretty strong. It's probably going to be the strongest stamina Monster Helm set for base game players. So this is probably going to be the set that you're going to want to go for if you don't have access to White Gold Tower. Another option is going to be Storm Fist. I don't have it here. It's going to be Storm Fist. Let me find it. Here it is, Storm Fist. This deals a little bit less damage overall compared to Selene's. The one piece is not very useful for DPS because you're basically attacking, so you don't really need to worry too much about sustain at all. But it is an option if you don't want to run Selene's web for whatever reason. So this comes from Tempest Island, another base game set. In my opinion, Selene's web is easier to complete than Tempest Island. So I would recommend running Selene's over Storm Fist on a werewolf build if you don't have access to Molag. For our body set, we're still going with Relequen. Relequen is still going to be the strongest set in the game for stamina DPS, and that does include werewolves. So this comes from Cloud Rest, the trial, so you do need to have access to the Terminus set expansion in order to grab this set. So I had the perfect version here, but you can also run the imperfect version. It's really up to you, because the perfect version, the armor at the very least does come from that Cloud Rest +1 and above. So if you don't have a group that's able to clear Cloud Rest +1 or above, then you can run the imperfect version instead. The main difference is that that max stamina bonus, the perfect version has that max stamina bonus as the 5-piece, but the imperfect version does not have that max stamina bonus. It's not going to be that big of a deal in terms of your overall DPS, but it is still something you want to keep in mind here. Then for our second set, now, werewolves only have one bar, so I can't bar swap here, so this set is pretty much always going to be active at all times. It's going to be Blood Moon, so this set is still going to be the strongest set for werewolves. So this is a dungeon set, so I believe this comes from, let me just double check real quick. This comes from March of Sacrifices, so you do need to have access to the Wolf Hunter DLC in order to grab this set. When you deal critical damage with the melee light attack, you gain a stack of Bloodstone for 8 seconds, and when you get 5 stacks, you become frenzied for 5 seconds, increasing your melee light attack damage by, in this case, let's look at the gold version, 30%, and your attack speed by 50%. This effect can occur every 18 seconds. So werewolves, a lot of your damage does come from light attacks, so it's going to be very helpful to have that Blood Moon bonus active. Now, there are a few other sets that you can run instead of running Relequen or Blood Moon. Because you're a werewolf, you only have one bar. Doesn't really matter what pieces your sets are in. Of course, you have to bear in mind, of course, that you also need to be able to perform as a non-werewolf as well. So generally speaking, you should be keeping Relequen as your body set, and then some other set is going to be your front bar set. So even though you will have your 2 5-piece sets active at all times as a werewolf, you have to keep in mind when you're a non-werewolf, that's not necessarily going to be the case. So in terms of body sets, the first one that I would recommend running is going to be Hunding's Rage. Let me pull it up real quick. This is going to be a crafted set. It is a base game set, so it requires 6 traits in order to craft. It's fairly simple to get. If you can't craft it yourself, then you can usually pay somebody to do it for you, whether that's in materials or in gold, or you can buy it off of guild traders. So this is a static bonus, so if you want to run this as a non-werewolf as well, you will need to have this on your body set, so that way you're not losing that static bonus when you are bar swapping and things like that. Just very, very simple set to obtain. Another crafted set that you might want to consider running is going to be Mechanical Acuity. This is another crafted set here. So this also requires 6 traits in order to craft yourself. This does require you to have the Clockwork City DLC in order to craft this. So you can either, again, buy it off of guild traders, you can craft it yourself, you can get somebody else to craft it for you, so pretty easy set to obtain here. This can act as either a front bar set or a body set, whichever one you happen to want. It's going to be stronger as a front bar set though, so I'd recommend running it as a front bar set. And again, these 2 sets are going to be useful as non-werewolves still. Other sets that you're going to want to pick up here is one's going to be Berserking Warrior. So this is a heavy armor set from Helra Citadel. So you will need to get the jewelry and the weapons in order to run this set, and because it is heavy armor, you will need to have to transmute the jewelry because the jewelry comes in healthy as default. So you will need to have access to the Somerset expansion in order to be able to transmute your jewelry into more useful traits. So just something you want to keep in mind if you do want to go with Advanced Yokeda. But this is going to be a very powerful set while you're out of werewolf form, as well as a decent set while you are in werewolf form. Already talked about Blood Moon. Briarheart is another set that you can pick up. So this is a drop set from Hrothgar, so you can farm it yourself, or you can buy it off of guild traders. So when you deal crit damage, you have a 10% chance to increase your weapon damage by, I believe, and it's fully golded out, I believe it's 445 for 10 seconds. While this effect is active, you get your critical strikes heal you for 588 health. This effect can occur once every 15 seconds. So another proc set you can wear on your front bar here. Still going to be very useful either as a werewolf or as a non-werewolf, but as a werewolf at least, your other sets are typically going to be stronger, particularly Blood Moon. Other sets, let me just really quick run through all of them. There are a few here that I do want to point out here. Leviathan is another set, so this is a base game dungeon set from Crypt of Hearts, so you do need to farm this yourself. This just adds a bunch of weapon crit, so very similar to Hunding's Rage. This is a static bonus, so you do want this on your body, or in those instances where you are dropped out of werewolf form, so that way you're not losing the crit while you swap to your back bar. Let's see what else here. I believe there is at least one other set I want to discuss. I can find it. Where is it? So Automaton is not going to be all that useful. Well, I mean, it's going to be a little bit useful as a werewolf, but out of werewolf form, it's not going to be very useful. So while you can wear this as a werewolf, it's not something I would recommend, just because, again, you have to be able to perform outside of werewolf form, and this set does not really allow you to do that. There are stronger sets out there when you are not in werewolf form. So I personally would not recommend running Automaton. Tzogvin is the last set I want to mention here. So this is one of the new sets that drops from Frostvault, so you do need to have access to the Wrathstone DLC in order to grab this set. When you deal crit damage, you gain a stack of precision, increasing weapon crit by, when it's fully golded out, 129 for 10 seconds, up to 10 stacks maximum. At max stacks, you also gain minor force, increasing your crit damage done by 10%. So this is useful for a werewolf because, as a werewolf, you actually don't have any source of minor force unless somebody is using Stalwart Guard on you. So Tzogvin is actually a pretty decent set to have on hand as a werewolf. If you, for whatever reason, are also running a double bow build, then Tzogvin is also going to be very useful there. So Tzogvin's definitely a set you might want to consider picking up. It's also not that bad of a set when out of werewolf form. Advanced Yokeda will outperform it just because Advanced Yokeda does give you more crit, but Tzogvin's is still a pretty solid kind of replacement for Advanced Yokeda while you're farming for that set. Now for our armor traits, it's all divines, all max stamina. As you can imagine, we just want to max out our Mundus stone as well as our max stamina. For our jewelry, we have 3 weapon damage enchants, and then we have 3 bloodthirsty. You could also go with 3 infused, or any combination between those 2 traits. Bloodthirsty is going to give you the highest amount of DPS, but in some fights you might want infused rather than bloodthirsty, because the execute phase is going to be a little bit too short, or you want some more burst damage instead, with infused instead. For weapons, it doesn't really matter which weapons you run, because you do lose your weapon passives while you're in werewolf form. So you can. I like to just stick with double daggers, because again, you do still want to be able to perform well outside of werewolf form. So double daggers will give you the most DPS outside of werewolf form, and then you will be running double damage health poison. So these can be created using fleshfly larva, nightshade, and then either nirn root or violet coprinus. So these are going to be very strong. There is currently a bug with damage health poisons that are actually reduce your weapon damage enchant down by a little bit. So that is something to keep in mind here. But weapon damage or damage health poisons are still going to be the strongest option in terms of raw DPS. Now for your back bar, you still want to have an infused Maelstrom bow with weapon damage enchant, again because you still want to be able to perform outside of werewolf form. You will not be able to hold this form indefinitely in trials, so you must be able to perform in a non-werewolf, and Maelstrom's bow will allow you to do that. Going over our character sheet now. So I am an orc and I am a sorc. Now, that being said, werewolves can perform very well across any of the different classes, but in my opinion, sorcs is probably going to be the best, just because you do maintain your class passives, and sorcs have class passives that do not have any sort of limitation, so to speak, on their activation. So for example, Templars and Nightblades, you need to have certain abilities active from those skill trees in order to get those passives, and as a werewolf you can't have those on your bar, so you will end up losing those passives overall. The sorcs don't really have that. Your passives are pretty much always going to be active. So sorcs, in my opinion, and in terms of mathematics, they should be the strongest werewolf class. Now, I'm an orc. Orcs are going to be the strongest race for stamina DPS across the board. They get 2,000 max stamina, 1,000 max health, and 258 additional weapon damage. You can also be a Dark Elf. Dark Elves get 1875 max magicka and stamina, and they get 258 additional spell damage and weapon damage. So they're a very, very close second in terms of raw stamina DPS. They do have that sort of flexibility though with the magicka and spell damage if you ever want to play a magicka sorcerer for whatever reason, or whatever class you end up playing. Other option is going to be Khajiits. They get 825 magicka, health, and stamina. They also get 85 magicka and stamina regen and 100 health regen, and they get 10% additional crit damage done. So those are your 3 primary options there. You could also do Redguard and Bosmer if you'd like. They get 2,000 max stamina and they get very nice regen passives. That being said though, again, as a werewolf you don't really have to worry about sustain too much, so Redguards and Bosmer, the Wood Elves, they're going to be a little bit weaker as a werewolf. So I do recommend going with Orcs or Dark Elves instead. For attributes, all points are going into stamina here. Not a surprise. If you do need some survivability, you can shift a few points into health if you so desire, but that's really going to be necessary too much, because as a werewolf you will actually be using blue food. So this gives you max health and max stamina, which gives you more than enough health. You can see here we're sitting at 18.5k health, just under that. We are a red orc, so we are an orc, so you do have additional health here, but even as a non-orc you should be sitting at about 17k health, even with 7 medium. So not really necessary to put points into health, but you can if you want a little bit more survivability. Then for our Mundus stone, we are going with the Shadow, so we do get some additional crit damage here. So it was buffed in Wrathstone, so just very, very nice to have that there. Now, we're able to use the Shadow because we do have sharpened on one of our weapons. So our weapon traits, I have Nirn on my main hand and sharpened on my offhand. Now that being said, you can still go with something like Nirn on main hand, precise on the offhand, and run the lover instead for additional penetration. You can also go with double sharpened here and pair that with the Shadow as well. And I'll go over the different CP distributions for those 3 different scenarios once we get to our CPs. Now for skill bars, pretty simple. We're a werewolf, so you just have all your werewolf active abilities on your bar, obviously, then you have your werewolf ultimate there. But I do want to talk a little bit about the morphs we choose. So you're going to want to go with Pack Leader rather than Werewolf Berserker, because the pets actually do quite a large amount of damage, actually. The 2 direwolves do a fairly decent amount of damage. You want Feral Pounce, so that way that'll give you a little bit of additional duration on your werewolf transformation. Brutal Pounce will give you some additional cleave, but your cleave is already abysmal as is, so it's better just to get the additional duration from Feral Pounce. Hircine's Fortitude for the heal. You should be getting Major Brutality from weapon damage potions, weapon power potions. I like Ferocious Roar because Major Fracture will already be applied via the tank's Pierce armor, so you don't really need the additional Major Fracture from Deafening Roar. At the very least, Ferocious Roar, you have a chance of setting smaller mobs off balance, so that's still something. You won't be able to set bosses off balance because you do need the Fear status effect to apply in order to get that off balance bonus. Howl of Despair, this will give people some additional synergies, which is always nice, and it also gives them unlimited empowered for 5 seconds, increasing their damage done by light attacks by 40%. So very, very helpful to have on hand. The additional synergy is great for tanks if they want to use Alkosh some more. It also helps restore resources for your DPS and healers, plus it gives your DPS unlimited powers, so that just helps out their DPS a little bit more. So very useful utility move to try to keep up every 20 seconds or so. And then Claws of Life for the additional heal, because in PvE, Major Defile is going to be pretty useless. Now, if you are going to PvP on the side, you might want to pick up Claws of Anguish instead for the Major Defile, but if you're strictly just going for PvE, Claws of Life is going to be the better morph for that additional heal that you get. Going over our champion points now. CP cap is remained the same between Murkmire and Wrathstone, so it's still 810. So starting off with our green CPs, we have 270 points. So we have 75 Mooncalf, 75 Tenacity. That gives us the 120 points to put into the remaining nodes however we'd like. I personally have 40 Shadow Ward, 40 Tumbling, and 40 Warlord. You can also push these two up to 100% for that last 1 percentage point. In this case, you have 70 points rather than 120 points to play around with. Now for our blue CPs, so this setup assumes that you have Nirn on the main hand, Sharpened on the offhand, and I'll go over the 2 other distributions in a little bit. So first we have 49 Mighty, 64 Piercing, 56 into Precise Strikes, 66 into Master at Arms, and 35 into Physical Weapon Expert. Now if you have double Sharpened, you get an additional 1376 penetration, so you can take out 1376 penetration from Piercing, so you'd be sitting at around 3200 penetration instead, and that'll give you roughly 39, anywhere between 38 and 40 piercing. So we're going to bump Mighty up to 64, and then we're going to put those remaining 9 points here into Physical Weapons Expert instead. So you have 44 Physical Weapons Expert, 66 Master at Arms, 56 Precise Strikes, 40 Piercing, and 64 into Mighty. Now if you're running Nirn Hone on the main hand, Precise on the offhand, and you're running the Lover instead, you have even more penetration. So while you do lose the 1376 times 2, about 2756 piercing from losing your 2 sharpened daggers, you gain 4196 additional penetration, so you gain about 1400 additional penetration. So you can drop this down even more by 1400, so that'll drop you down to roughly I like to be anywhere between like 20 and 25, so I personally like to sit at 25 piercing. Then you can bump Precise Strikes up to 66, and you can bump Physical Weapons Expert 47, and then you can do Piercing up to 27 here. So 64 Mighty, 27 Piercing, 66 Precise Strikes, 66 Master at Arms, 47 Physical Weapons Expert when you're running the Lover. Finally, for our red CPs, I have a one-size-fits-most approach, so basically that will give you very good mitigation across all pieces of content, but it will not maximize your mitigation against any single piece of content, so you will need to shift red CP points around if you want to maximize your mitigation and get across in one trial. I have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thickskin, and 64 into both Hardy and Elemental Defender. Alright, that's pretty much it for the builds. Let's go ahead and talk about our rotation. I'm going to move our dummy back so we can kind of do stuff on the dummy here. Now, the Werewolf is going to be, the rotation itself is going to be very simple. It's basically just light attack and use Claws of Life on cooldown. So after you get the dot done with Claws of Life, you just keep on light attacking. That's going to be for a dummy, but in an actual raid, you will obviously be using these abilities a little bit more often. So your primary rotation is still going to be Claws of Life every 10 seconds, and then light attack in between. But you also want to use Howl of Despair as well in order to provide that synergy. So I would go Claws of Life, Howls of Despair every 10 seconds, and then you just keep on light attacking between each time. Now, in terms of when you want to use Feral Pounce, Hircine's Fortitude, and Ferocious Roar, Ferocious Roar is only going to be useful if you have ads that can be CC'd, because you do need them to be feared in order to set them off bounce. So you're not really going to be using this all too much. Hircine's Fortitude, obviously, when you need the heal. And then Feral Pounce, you should be using this every 4 seconds or so. So you basically just need to back up and then just use Feral Pounce. You do need to be a certain distance away. So right around here is where about how far you need to be in order to use Feral Pounce. This will add 4 seconds onto your werewolf timer here. So you also need to be about 10 meters away in order to get that. So you're going to have to be a little bit further out. So probably right around here is when you get that additional timer on your werewolf transformation timer. So when you start to run a little bit low, you just want to back up about 10 meters away, roughly around here, and then just use Feral Pounce to get that additional timer back. But other than that, very simple rotation is just going to be Claws of Life, and then Howl of Despair every 10 seconds for the synergy, and then light attack in between. So all that's said and done, let's actually do a 6-minute living part so you guys get an idea of how much a werewolf DPS is able to pull. So I am going to be using weapon power potions here, so that's where I'm getting my source of... highlight them real quick. This is where I get my source of Major Brutality, Major Savagery, so just bear that in mind. We are not getting Major Fracture, so if you want to compare this to other builds that do have Major Fracture, just keep that in mind. We will be doing less DPS than they will, just because we don't have that Major Fracture built into our kind of tool set here. There's something you want to keep in mind if you want to compare this like a Stamina Nightblade or a Stamina Warden. Now let's just go ahead and get started here. So I will do an actual raid parse here. So I will be using Howl of Despair every 10 seconds. So again, it'll be Claws of Life, Howl of Despair, and then light attacks in between. So here we go. And again, the Howl of Despair is there for the synergy. It's not really for any sort of additional DPS. Now it's up to you if you want to use Howl of Despair a little bit more often. I'm just like to use it every 10 seconds because at the very least you'll be able to give more people the synergy that way. You can use it every 5 seconds if you'd like, but it's better just to kind of time it. At least in my opinion, it's easier to time it just with Claws of Life instead. Now, depending on when Blood Moon procs, you might want to just let the proc completely run out before you use Claws of Life and Howl of Despair. It's up to you if you want to do that, because obviously when you're using abilities, you're not light attacking, so you're not really going to be able to make use of the Blood Moon proc there. So you'll know when you have the Blood Moon proc active when you start glowing red like that. Obviously you can also tell when your light attacks are going to go a lot faster. There is also an add-on for those of you guys who are on PC that will keep track of Blood Moon for you as well. I believe it's just called Blood Moon. I could be mistaken on the name of that though. For example, you can let the Blood Moon proc run out before you reapply Claws of Life and Howl of Despair. Alright, so there we go. That is our DPS. We're able to pull 49.5k, and that is with Howl of Despair and Claws of Life. We are not using Pounce at all. In our actual raid, we would also be using Pounce, but I just kind of wanted to show you guys on a relatively short fight. So we were in combat for 2 minutes. If you use your werewolf transformation at the beginning of the fight and the fight lasts about 2 minutes, you will definitely have some werewolf timer left over. The werewolf timer actually does last for a pretty decent amount of time, but you won't be able to sustain it over like a full-length trial. You'll probably be able to sustain it for maybe, if you're able to use Feral Pounce when necessary, you'll probably be able to sustain it for the duration of a boss fight. Just for trash pulls, depending on how much time is spent between trash pulls and things like that, it might not be feasible to kind of maintain your werewolf transformation. But you can see here, almost 50k just with light attacks and 2 active abilities. Very easy builds to kind of be able to hit those DPS thresholds. But again, you will be expected to be able to make those DPS checks for whatever guild you want to apply for on a non-werewolf build as well. So even though werewolves are able to pull very good DPS, you still want to be able to master a non-werewolf build just for those instances where you cannot or you will fall out a werewolf for. So that's pretty much it for this build video. If you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. For those of you guys who are a little bit wary about werewolf builds, don't worry. Our raid lead for Mayflower has cleared Vet Cloudrus +3. Basically the hardest content in the game on a werewolf, so you can still do it as a werewolf. It's just you kind of need to be a little bit more aware about raid mechanics and as well as your own limitations as a werewolf build. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.